We often think that to get big, amazing results, we need to make some kind of huge, heroic effort. But what if the real secret to success was something much, much smaller? In this explainer, we're going to dive into a really powerful idea, how tiny, consistent changes can lead to absolutely remarkable results.
All right, to really get this, let me tell you a story. Imagine a professional sports team that was, well, let's just say they weren't very good. For almost 100 years, they were just mediocre. And then, suddenly, in just 5 short years, they become one of the most dominant teams in the history of their sport. So the question is, how on earth did they do that?
It wasn't one giant, dramatic change. Nope. It all started with a single philosophy. It's called the aggregation of marginal gains. Now that sounds kind of complicated, right? But the idea behind it is actually incredibly simple. Just find a tiny 1% margin for improvement in everything you do. So let's take a look at how this tiny little number played out in what became one of the most incredible turnarounds in sports history.
The team we're talking about is British Cycling. Back in 2003, they hired a new performance director named Dave Brailsford. For 100 years, they had won almost nothing. They were so bad that the top bike manufacturers in Europe literally wouldn't sell them bikes because they were afraid it would hurt their brand if other pro cyclists saw the Brits using their gear. So Brailsford came in with this strategy. Let's just break down every single thing that goes into riding a bike and then improve each little piece by just 1%.
And when I say they looked everywhere for that 1%, I mean everywhere. They did the obvious stuff, like redesigning the bike seats to be more comfortable. They started rubbing alcohol on the tires for a little better grip. But they didn't stop there. Oh no. They tested different massage gels to find out which one helped muscles recover the fastest. They even hired a surgeon to teach the whole team the proper way to wash their hands so they wouldn't get sick as often. They painted the inside of their team truck white just so they could spot tiny bits of dust that might mess with the finely tuned bikes.
Now, on their own, each of these changes seems tiny, almost trivial, right? But when you add them all up together, the results were absolutely staggering. Just 5 years after Brailsford took over, at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, the British cycling team won an unbelievable 60% of all the available gold medals. They had completely dominated the sport.
Okay, so how is that even possible? How can such tiny improvements lead to such a massive, massive outcome? Well, the secret lies in some simple but incredibly powerful math.
Let's just imagine you decide to get 1% better at something. Just 1%. It's so small you'd barely even notice it.
But here's the catch. You don't just do it once. You do it every single day. For a whole year, you just stay consistent.
If you do that, at the end of the year, you will be just a little bit better. Because of the magic of compounding, you'll be nearly 37 times better. Let that sink in for a second. 37. That is the explosive power of small, consistent gains piling up over time.
And here's the key takeaway. Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. It's just like how money multiplies with compound interest in the bank. The effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them. Take a look at this graph. A tiny 1% improvement each day starts slow, but then it just explodes into that incredible upward curve. But look at the flip side. A 1% decline each day, just a few small bad habits, and you can end up all the way down at nearly zero. The effects are small in the beginning, but over time, they become absolutely massive. Now, all this sounds amazing in theory, but let's be real. If it's that simple, why do so many of us struggle to build good habits? Well, this brings us to a really common problem, something I think we've all felt. It's called the valley of disappointment.
We've all been there, right? You start a new habit, you put in the work for days, maybe even weeks, and you see nothing. It feels like you're spinning your wheels, going nowhere. So if the math is real, why is it so incredibly hard to stick with it when you're not seeing immediate results? Let me use an analogy that makes this crystal clear. Imagine you have an ice cube in a cold room. The temperature is 28 degrees. Now you slowly start to heat the room. 29 degrees. Nothing. 30. Still just an ice cube. 31. Still nothing. You've been putting in all this energy, raising the temperature, but the result looks exactly the same. Then you hit 32 degrees, and bam! The breakthrough happens. It starts to melt. That 1 degree shift wasn't magic. It was the result of all the degrees that came before it. And that is a perfect picture of what happens with our habits. We expect our progress to be a straight line, just like that top line on the chart. But in reality, progress is usually delayed. The real results of our efforts are slow to show up, and we find ourselves stuck in this gap, this valley of disappointment, where it feels like all our hard work isn't paying off.
But here's the key. We have to reframe how we think about this period.
It's not a valley of failure. It's what's called the Plateau of Latent Potential. This is that critical phase where, just like with the ice cube, all your work isn't being wasted, it's being stored. You're building up all this potential that's about to be unleashed. You just have to stick with it long enough to see the breakthrough.
So if we know we just have to persist through that plateau, how do we make it easier on ourselves? Well, this leads us to challenge a piece of advice we hear all the time. We're always told to focus on our goals. But it turns out that might be the very thing that's holding us back.
To really get this, we need to understand the difference between a goal and a system. It's simple. A goal is the result you want to achieve. The system is the process that leads to those results. So, if you're a coach, your goal is to win the championship. Your system is what your team does at practice every single day. A goal is the destination. The system is the route you take to get there.
Okay, here's why focusing only on goals can be a huge trap. First off, winners and losers, they often have the exact same goals. Every team in the league wants to win the championship, but only one does. Second, achieving a goal is just a temporary change. Sure, you can clean your messy room, that's a goal. But if you don't change your system of being messy, it's just going to get messy again. Third, goals can postpone your happiness. You tell yourself, I'll finally be happy when I reach my goal. And finally, what happens after you achieve a big goal? The motivation often vanishes, and you can slide right back to where you started.
So what's the alternative? It's really simple. Forget about the goals for a minute and focus entirely on your systems instead.
This all leads to an incredibly powerful quote that perfectly sums this whole thing up. Here's the first part. You do not rise to the level of your goals. And here's the punchline. You fall to the level of your systems. The British cyclists didn't win because they suddenly decided they wanted a gold medal more than anyone else. They won because their system of daily 1% improvements was simply better. Your results are always a reflection of your habits. Your system is what delivers those results every time.
And that leaves us with one final thought. The real question isn't about some big thing you want to achieve way off in the future. It's about right now. So what's one tiny 1% part of your daily system that you can improve today?